Which is more important to get right, diet or sleep?
I'm going to tell you diet. And the reason I'm going to tell you that is because so many things are happening on the endocrine level that if you're messing with your endocrine system through your diet, game over.
It's going to disrupt your sleep, that's for sure, right? I know that's a tricky one. I've spent years helping women understand their hormones, and one of the most powerful shifts I've seen is what happens when you start working with your cycle instead of against it. It's not just about fewer symptoms, it's about feeling more like yourself again, more steady, more energized, more at home in your body. We studied cycle syncing, and 92% of women had less PMS in just 60 days. If you're curious, you can try it for free. Just download the MyFlow app on iTunes or Google Play and use the code FREEMONTH. Because everything we know about cardiovascular disease was built around a male. That's the research gap at the center of today's guest's work, and closing it has been her life's mission, because here's what the same research tells us. 80% of heart disease is preventable. Dr. Suzanne Steinbaum is a preventative cardiologist with over 2 decades specializing in women's cardiovascular health. And she's the founder of Heart Tech Health, whose signature program, Adesso, gives every woman access to cardiac prevention that was actually designed for her biology. In this episode, we're getting into why the perimenopausal window is one of the most critical and most ignored moments in a woman's cardiovascular health, what estrogen is actually doing for the heart and arteries, and what women are misreading as hormonal symptoms that are actually early cardiac signs. Welcome, Dr. Steinbaum.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It's such a pleasure. You and I met in New York last year. And because you were wearing the most fabulous outfit of anyone at this conference. And I said, we just have to be friends. And then we discovered what it is that you do and I do. And then we have just been in touch ever since. And I really think your work is so special. And, this whole show, the Ovary Club, is really all about how do we have a gender nuanced conversation so that women can get the right information to make critical health decisions all throughout their lives, whether they're in their 20s or their 50s, all the way in between. And, you're the first holistic cardiologist that I've ever met. And I'm just so excited to be bringing your conversation to our listeners today. So get ready, everybody. Get your notepads out. Take some notes. It's going to be a good one.
For sure. Because I think what is so frustrating and exciting simultaneously is that I've been doing this. I keep saying it's 20 years. Honestly, I think it's getting closer to 30, but whatever. The point is, it's been going on for decades that we've had this conversation, and now is the moment. I am so sort of proud of this generation of women who are like, nope, we're done. We are actually demanding change. When I started, there was literally no such thing as women in heart disease. And I was in my training, I was in my residency, working in the emergency room. And I kept seeing women being brought in with heart disease, completely misdiagnosed, just ignored. And there was this one day, a 53-year-old woman was brought in. I'll never forget it. I talk about it all the time because it was so life-changing for me. She was uncomfortable holding her chest, her stomach, and the doctors that were my teachers diagnosed her with gastroenteritis and put her in the corner of the emergency room, where she proceeded to have a heart attack. And that was it. I went to the chief of cardiology and I said, I want to do a fellowship in women and heart disease. And guess what he said?
Which was?
There's no such thing. And I said, okay, well, if we prevent disease in women, then maybe this won't happen anymore. All right, can I do a preventive cardiology fellowship? And guess what he said? There was no
Same
thing.
Yeah.
And talk about right place at the right time. Dean Ornish was on the West Coast running the lifestyle heart trial that was looking at diet and exercise, yoga, and stress management. And my chief of cardiology was great friends with Dean Ornish, and they decided that we would become the East Coast site for that work. And I did one of the first preventive cardiology fellowships in this country.
Yeah, speak a little bit about your background because you have like an illustrious medical career and pedigree, and you have all sorts of unconventional training as well, as you've said in our conversation. So just so that our listeners really understand how special you are. I would love for you to share.
Thank you so much. I don't know if I would look at it like that. I think that when I started, my vision was a little too early in a way. And I was focused on this holistic approach. It wasn't common to have a yoga room and a hospital. They thought I was a nut. Who is this flaky doctor talking about stress management? That's ridiculous. At the time, I actually will never forget, I made a speech about the connection between the mind and the heart. And I had the head of the scientific committee from the American Heart Association call me and said, "We haven't proven that yet. You can't say that." And it was just, research was there. It was bubbling. What we're talking about, longevity medicine right now, it was what I was doing 25 years ago, which was this prevention, this concept of how do we actually live longer with vitality and not getting sick. And it wasn't just about the heart, it was about the mind. It was about how we manage stress, how we slept, not only how we ate, but really how we chose to live every single day. And the big picture of this was validated through Dean Ornish's work and the work that I did. I ended up running the cardiac rehab center where we did Dean Ornish's research after my chief of cardiology left. And I was one of the only youngest women to run a program.
I
And
mean, you're not bragging enough, so I'm going to do it for you. You were the director of women's cardiovascular prevention, health, and wellness for Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. You were the director of women and heart disease at Lenox Hill Hospital. You were the director of the Center for Cardiac and Pulmonary Health at Beth Israel Medical Center. You've been awarded multiple times by like the New York Times Super Doctor, Best Doctors, Top Doctors. I mean, you know. You've been a scientific advisory board member for the Women's Heart Alliance. You know, when it comes to women and the heart, you are the one that has the insider info, and I really wanted to make sure we had you on the show to talk about this today. So
yeah,
that's it. I had to brag for you.
all that. I really appreciate it. And I don't think about where I am right now. What I do think about is I know the stories. I know the truth about why we are where we are today. And I know the research. And more than that, I've taken care of thousands and thousands and thousands of women. And when you do that, you learn so much more than sometimes the research studies that don't actually fit the patient that's sitting in front of you. And sometimes you kind of create your own experiments and how to do it. And I've been so lucky to be the director of these programs because I was able to bring in technology. I was able to really test and understand the lining of the artery, the endothelium, which is the root of why women get heart disease. That's part of the problem that happens with menopause. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little more.
Yeah, I want to start diving into the questions because I know our listeners are like eager to learn.
Let's do it.
All right. So I think, we started the show with this big important piece of information that, heart disease is the number one killer of women, which I think is not really talked about enough because everybody's obviously so focused on female cancers, and those are very scary, but it's heart disease that's really the main issue. And yet most women are completely blindsided by this. And my question for you is, what's actually going wrong? Why are women still falling through the cracks with this disease?
Here's my favorite question, but I want to put a pin in what you just talked about. More women die of heart disease more than all cancers combined. I mean, it's
yes. It's
Exactly.
Yes. It's worse than just being the number one spot.
Right. It's more than all cancers combined.
Yeah.
So when we go back in time and we figure this out, and this is why I think the history of all this is so important. Since 1984, more women started dying of heart disease compared to men. And when you look at why that was, for the 20 years before, all the research was done on men and extrapolated to women. Well, we weren't so aware until the early 90s. The Office of Women's Health was opened through the NIH, and all of a sudden we had to do research. 50% of the research participants had to be women. And so now research was done on women specifically, and the data was desegregated so we can actually see how it impacted women. And what we found at that time was that women's heart disease is just simply different than men. And so you can't extrapolate it. So the first problem is the research. The second problem is education. When I was in medical school, there was no such thing as women and heart disease. When the generation before was in medical school, I mean, they were smoking in the offices. It was like, it was just a completely different thing.
Yeah.
And in fact, when we look at the first risk analysis for women, the Framingham risk score, which was incredibly cutting edge, really determining who was at risk for heart disease, not one of my patients actually fit into the paradigm of what that was. It was really designed for men. And to this day, the risk analyses that are used to determine risk in women misses women's risk 50% of the time, especially women less than 65 years old. And then the third part of the problem are the women. And I'll tell you what the problem is: education. Because women don't know. We haven't known. Everyone's talking about menopause. It's the first time we've had this conversation. After menopause comes heart disease. We spend 40% of our lives in menopause, and 70% of women are going to have some form of heart disease. So this is
Hold on.
Yes.
Let's just rewind.
Yes.
70%.
Yes. So this is the conversation that we need to be having right now. I am so grateful for this menopause conversation, but here we are, and this is the next one we need to talk about.
If you've ever wanted to ask me your own hormone questions, the Ovary Club Insiders is where you can do that. You'll get access to private podcast episodes where I answer real member questions with clear, science-backed guidance you can actually use. Join us at alisavd.com/insiders. Well, that's what we're trying to do on the Club, is to just really bring in this gender nuanced conversation, but also make sure that we're really getting that education that we need at every life stage to make critical healthcare decisions. Because, as you know, heart disease doesn't just happen overnight. It's a cumulative process as well as a hormonal one. And so there's a window that you like to talk about in perimenopause that you've identified as a critical intervention point. What's happening to the cardiovascular system during that transition, and why does taking action in that window change outcomes so dramatically?
I want to go back in time to the beginning of when I started this preventive fellowship, because we talked about root cause early in those days. Why was the disease developing? Why in some people was it getting worse? And we had a really good understanding of the basics. We knew family history mattered. We knew high cholesterol and high blood pressure and elevated sugars, obesity, sedentary lifestyle, poor diet, smoking. We knew that. But what we started to really appreciate, especially when it comes to women's heart disease, is that the lining of the artery is the critical organ that's affected during perimenopause and menopause. It's called the endothelium. I always describe it as a lining of the pocketbook so you can visualize this. Okay. It is the lining in the artery. And as estrogen decreases, as that whole cycle starts, I mean, perimenopause is really such an insane dance, because it's not just decrease of estrogen, it's spikes in estrogen. And that's really what kind of makes us feel wacky. But that beginning of this decrease in estrogen is when the arteries get stiff and the endothelium gets stiff. And how that responds is very similar to what happens when you have a pocketbook with a lining and you get a tear in the lining of the pocketbook. And all of a sudden, your keys, your gum, your wallet, like everything is in between it, and you can't find it anymore. That kind of, does this resonate at all? It's that
Absolutely.
it's the same idea. So when the endothelium gets stiff and you have the force of blood across that stiff, it's almost like a popsicle stick versus a pipe cleaner that bends. That popsicle stick doesn't bend. And the little micro tears develop in that endothelium. And inside those micro tears goes cholesterol and inflammatory cells. And all of a sudden, you have the buildup of a plaque. So, if you think about it conceptually, if we make sure that endothelium is not stiff, is more like a pipe cleaner, and it could dilate and constrict, and that's the job of the arteries, then we'll never get heart disease. So, in that perimenopausal period,
Mm.
just studying the endothelium, what happens? There is nitric oxide, which dilates the artery, and that is part of what keeps it healthy. We know that exercise helps to maintain that artery dilating. We know a healthy diet, low inflammation, keeping the blood pressure down, keeping the weight down, all of these things keeps the lining of the artery healthy. And I always would say in that perimenopausal period, train for menopause like you're training for a marathon, because that's the beginning. And if you can really have an impact on that endothelium, you'll never develop heart disease.
And you're saying, just sort of recap all this, I mean, so many critical things. First of all, women are not thinking about their arteries. They're not necessarily even knowing what their endothelial lining is doing, the fact that it could stiffen due to lifestyle and dietary factors, but that you're saying that dietary and lifestyle factors as an intervention intentionally during menopause, perimenopause, can prevent disease in most cases.
80% of the time. I want to
That's,
repeat that. 80% of
oh,
the time, heart
that's
disease.
that is like great news. And that, because, I think there's a risk of saying, and I'm going to ask you a question about estrogen in a minute, but I think there's a fear of saying, well, postmenopause, it's the same kind of conditioning we receive around menstruation. It's like, oh, it's the curse, and we're just going to suffer. So it's like, oh, I'm going to be in menopause and I'm just going to be at risk for all these diseases. And there's nothing I can do. There's just like there was nothing I could do for my cramps or whatever. And I just love this perspective that you're bringing, that, these consistent levers, pretty simple, not expensive, that can really really make the hugest difference, 80% reduction.
And I think it's important for people to understand. And I hear women say, my dad had heart disease, it's going to happen. Or they say the reverse. There's no heart disease in my family, I'm never going to get it. And this is not the case. You individually are living your life. You individually have your cholesterol, your blood pressure, your stress, your inflammation, your lack of sleep, your closet smoking, whatever it is. But that's your story. And the heart is so interesting. I always say it's the metronome of your life. It's
Mm.
carrying your whole story. If you had problems during pregnancy, your risk of heart disease goes up 5 to 10 years later.
Okay, let me ask some more questions because I have a pregnancy question. Okay, so
Okay.
estrogen gets talked about
Yeah.
almost exclusively through the lens of cycles and fertility, but you work with it as a cardiovascular molecule. What's it actually doing for the heart and artery? What starts to happen structurally when it shifts?
We know with a decrease in estrogen, all the bad stuff that deals with the heart happens. And one of the things that happens is blood pressure goes up. Why? The arteries become stiff. The endothelium becomes stiff. Estrogen is this amazing vasodilator. the fountain of youth. The reason it's called that is because it's really about the arteries in so many different ways. And when you have true arterial health, you have brain health, you have energy, you sleep better, you're more vital in every single way. And so estrogen's connection to the arteries is really what we need to understand. Because what are we going to do? Menopause happens to every single one of us. I know in your 20s, you're like, it's never going to happen to me. Like, it's going to. And then as you start going through perimenopause, you realize, oh my goodness, I have no control over this. But I'm going to tell you, you actually do. One of the most profound studies shows that hot flashes is associated with an increase in cardiovascular disease. Why? Because this decrease in estrogen, this stiffness in the arteries, it's part of why hot flashes happen. And so as we go through that perimenopausal period, if we are exercising, if we are dieting, if we are sleeping, if we are actually addressing the risk factors, we can go through menopause easier. If we, I'm going to call it supplement our estrogen. We can talk about hormone replacement therapy, menopause transition therapy. I'm going to tell you, if we supplement estrogen, we can actually keep that endothelium dilating. We can keep the endothelium healthy. And if we do that, we are going to prevent cardiovascular disease and dementia.
So powerful. And I think it's, things that women are not aware of, that the hot, again, we're conditioned to tolerate suffering. So it's like a hot flashes. That's just part of the journey and it's nothing I can do about it. But to know that it could be associated with an increased risk for heart disease, that makes you maybe more incentivized to get to the root of it, to take some action. And I love connecting all of these symptoms down to things that inspire you to act, to do something to improve your self-care, because it pays huge dividends. Okay. Chronic stress. Obviously, we have to talk about stress. We're talking about the heart. What's it actually doing to the female cardiovascular system at a physiological level? And why does it hit women's hearts differently than men's?
So stress is not a bad thing. When you're in the Olympics or you're taking a test.
Oh, yes, Liz. So many of us in the Olympics.
Using that as an example, any kind of race, taking a test, making a public speech, stress hormones, epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol, in that moment, it's great. But chronic stress over time.
It's always on.
It's always on.
Like you're always on stress.
Right. You're not getting recovery. You're not sleeping well. There's no stress management. Every day you wake up, you're like, ugh, just that feeling. Epinephrine, norepinephrine, it increases your heart rate, shortness of breath. It's actually clamping down your arteries, and cortisol increases your inflammation. So let's go back to the endothelium.
Please.
When you have those micro tears and there's inflammation in there, that is part of what actually is the infrastructure of plaque, of atherosclerosis. So inflammation in the arteries, and we can test that through a high sensitivity C-reactive protein in the bloodstream. Having inflammation increases your risk of heart disease independently of anything else.
And this is something that we have to really think about in every decade of our life, right? Because it isn't just an extra special. I mean, certainly the window of perimenopause has its own special hormonal aspect. But if you have your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, all with this kind of chronic stress, that I would imagine sets you up to have even more vulnerability in that perimenopause window, because you've had that inflammation from stress that's sort of been accumulating for 2 decades, potentially more, putting you at greater risk.
I think you're really speaking my language when I talk about the heart is the metronome of your life. It's not. Heart disease didn't start the day as you said, the day it shows up. It's been going on for decades. It's been silent. When you look at where you are the day you are declared in menopause, I think that is so strange. Like 1 year after not menstruating, here you are in menopause. It's like I don't know, what are you supposed to do? What happens now? It's been going on. And so the idea of how are we going to treat menopause? It's not that day. It should be happening for those 10 years before, because those 10 years before is that critical place where we can prevent heart disease. By the time we get to that menopause day, we've had a decade or more where we could have been exercising. One of the things about exercise I just want to mention,
Please.
people think of it as being a chore. Like, "Ugh, I don't feel like going to the gym," or, "Oh, I just don't want to do this." Exercise does not have to be torture. It could be a moderate intensity, getting up and moving for 30 minutes, 4 to 5 days a week. What that does for your arteries is profound. It's exercise to me is a medication. A treatment for hot flashes is exercise. A
Love it.
treatment for dementia is exercise. A treatment to prevent cardiovascular disease is exercise. If you get into menopause exercising, you're going to allow your arteries the ability to dilate better, and you're less likely to experience hot flashes.
And I think that's, this is a show for women of every decade, from your 20s to beyond your 50s. And the idea is that we want to understand that when it comes to our ovaries, they're with us for life. And we have to take sort of a longitudinal care approach within our own life, right? So exercising in your 20s, managing your stress in your 20s, making good, healthy food choices in your 20s and 30s and 40s will set you up for an easier perimenopause transition. And all the same levers that you're pulling to support your hormones in your ovaries will support your heart, right? I mean, it's all connected. And that's the other thing. It's like we can't separate out what's good for one aspect of the body tends to be good for all of them. Let's talk a little bit about pregnancy, because you mentioned how issues in pregnancy can affect or even predict heart challenges later. So let's talk through some of these adverse pregnancy outcomes, preeclampsia, gestational diabetes as early cardiac warning signals. What connects those experiences to what happens to a woman's heart decades later?
It's fascinating because we think of pregnancy as really the first stress test for women. It's the first time in your life your body is really pushed to its limits. And when you have preeclampsia or even just high blood pressure, gestational diabetes, this is a problem with the endothelium. This is a problem with the microvasculature. And the microvasculature are these tiny arteries. Do you remember capillaries from?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Everyone remembers capillaries, those little arteries behind the big ones. Well, we have that in our hearts. And in women, 66% of the time when a woman presents with heart complaints, it's not necessarily those big arteries that are blocked. It's the microvasculature. And during pregnancy, when you have these problems, these complications, placenta abruptia, all of these different complications, multiple miscarriages, those microvasculature are not functioning well. They are pushed to the limit and they're not dilating well enough to support blood flow. And that's part of what this complication is during pregnancy. This is what holistic cardiology is about. Everything we're talking about. If
Yeah.
we look at the heart as an organ, which is how the system has looked at it up to now, look at all the things that we're missing.
So many things. And I just love that you're connecting the dots, between different life stages and pregnancy, perimenopause and postmenopause. It's so refreshing. You factor things in most cardiologists never ask about: emotional history, depression, chronic grief, even childhood environment. What is that psychological load doing to the heart physiologically?
With chronic depression, there's a fourfold increased risk of cardiovascular disease. So when you think about what that state is, there's a couple of different factors. But one of them is really that chronic stress. You are, and I use the term stress physiologically. You're having that epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol. It's a continuous part of your life every day.
Mm.
It's not that you're under stress, you're depressed. but you're living in that kind of environment. And when you're depressed, you are less likely to eat healthy. You are less likely to exercise, more likely to drink too much, smoke. It's setting you up for truly living in an unhealthy space. I always tell people, if you're feeling blue and it's not going away and it's getting darker, don't dismiss it, because it's not just that you're not feeling great about life, it's hurting you. And you need to really address it and get help.
And I think mental health issues are something that we all go through at different stages of our lives, but also women, because of our hormonal fluctuations throughout the month, major hormonal inflection points like postpartum and perimenopause, we can be, more vulnerable to chronic anxiety or depression. And I think just knowing that that is something to take a little bit more seriously when it comes to our long-term heart health is really important information, that there is an impact on the heart. It's not just in your head, you know?
Yeah.
So important. What are women consistently misattributing to hormone stress or just getting older that are actually early cardiac signals worth paying attention to?
I think the microvascular issue is fascinating because here's the story. As you start going through menopause and that estrogen decreases, age wise, for many women, they're going through taking care of kids, working, multitasking, parents. There's a lot on women's plates in life, right? And so they might not be taking as good of care of themselves. They might not be paying attention. In fact, we know that women put themselves last on the list. So all of a sudden, one day, a woman who's about 45, 50 is walking down the street and she has chest pain and shortness of breath. And she's like, oh my goodness, what is that? What is that? And she goes to the emergency room. Then all the tests are done and she's told she's fine. So she goes to her primary care doctor because it keeps happening now. It's happening more and more often. It happened when she ran up the stairs, or it happened when she was carrying packages down the street. And now she's like, all right, I got to go to the doctor. Primary care doctor does an EKG, does blood tests, everything is fine. Doctor says maybe it's your stomach. So she goes to a gastroenterologist and stomach is looked at, endoscopy's done, maybe it's ulcers. Nope, everything's fine. Gastroenterologist says, I don't know, maybe it's rheumatologic, maybe it's an autoimmune disease. So she goes to rheumatologist, and this goes on and on. Endocrinologist. Finally, she goes back to the emergency room. Again, everything's normal. And in the ER, they say, you're probably depressed and anxious. And she ends up in a psychiatrist's office. I will tell you, that woman is the typical woman who comes to me for a second, third, fourth, fifth opinion. And it's her microvasculature. It's those capillaries, those tiny arteries that have become stiff. And as she's walking around and doing her normal thing, but now her estrogen is decreased, so those arteries are stiff and they're not supplying as much oxygen, she's having symptoms. The most important part of the story is, if you get a diagnosis, this is reversible. Being dismissed has been the biggest frustration, because this is the problem. This is what we're all dealing with. When women have symptoms of chest pain, 59% of the time, they experience this term called gaslighting.
Oh,
Now,
we're all familiar with that here in the Ovary Club, right? Because it doesn't just happen from your viewpoint, from a cardiology perspective, but women have been living with this. And I think that's why they're used to it. By the time they're showing up with this type of heart situation, they've been so trained to expect that gaslighting. It's been part of their hormonal journey, their gynecological care journey for decades, right? Like, it's probably, maybe. I mean, I remember once I was waiting to see a physician for some appointment, and I was kept waiting for 2 hours. And unfortunately, I didn't expect to be kept waiting that long. So I didn't have a snack with me, and it was it was too late that, I had already eaten lunch. I didn't have a snack, and I was planning to be out of there and able to feed myself. With my PMOS epigenetics, I need to manage my blood sugar really carefully. And I didn't have what I needed on me. And I was getting so dysregulated. So
Yeah.
I get into the office and I was like, I was really, I was very upset, and I got very emotional. And she goes, do you have depression? Do you need medication? This
Need a
happened to,
cracker.
I was like, I actually just need my appointment to have happened on time, which is what I said. And so that I could have eaten on time, because now I'm having hypoglycemia, and I don't appreciate you trying to tell me that I'm having a mental health issue when I'm having a blood sugar issue. Now I'm an unusual patient, as I know these things, but it happens to every woman. And I think it's so great that you talk about this from the perspective of your heart health management. So if a woman is being sent home,
Yeah.
dismissed with their cardiac symptoms, what should she refuse to have brushed aside? How can she protect herself from this gaslighting?
I think what's really important is that she finds a doctor that she can talk to.
But if she's in the ER, right?
Well, if she's in the ER, so let's just talk about what the ER's job is. They're trying to make sure that you're not having a massive heart attack and you're going to die.
Right.
That's their job. And so if they do all the testing and they say you're ready to go home, you're fine doesn't mean you don't have a problem. You're fine means you go home and sleep. You're not in danger. But the next day you get on the phone and you call your primary doctor.
Okay.
And I think from my perspective, I mean, everyone's going to be mad I'm saying this, every doctor. ChatGPT is hysterical to me because everyone's on it right now. And they come in with their ChatGPT, stack of, well, ChatGPT told me. This is the only time I think it's so important. Because what you start talking about to ChatGPT is tell your story. Do you have high blood pressure? Do you have high cholesterol? Do you have elevated sugars? You just brought up a very important one. Do you have PMOS? Which is really, has been thought of as a gynecologic issue. It's not. It's actually a cardiac issue as far as I'm concerned. And
it's a polyendocrine metabolic ovarian situation. And that's what I wrote about in my first book, that it needs a multifaceted dietary and lifestyle approach. And that's, I've been in recovery for a long time and have helped so many women do that. But I think we know that women with this disorder have a greater risk heart disease for so many of the reasons that we've already talked about today. So I think if you are listening and you do have that disorder, taking your health seriously, using those dietary and lifestyle levers, the goal shouldn't be just to find a supplement to get rid of your acne with PMOS. You really want to be thinking deeply about, how do you get your body to function optimally so that you can have good health for your lifespan?
And know what these risks are. Put them in chat and say, I have something wrong with me. And I'm being told from the emergency room, I'm fine. I know I'm not fine. And I'm concerned it's my heart. Because, write this down, everyone, 66% of the time in perimenopause and early menopause, it's going to be microvascular disease, which is true. It's real. You can have symptoms. And it's reversible. It's not easy to diagnose, and that's the problem. Our diagnoses have always been for those big arteries, but to the point of what you're trying to have everyone understand and so successfully doing it has to pertain to the heart too.
Yes.
It's not just the other stuff. This is the essence of your livelihood. This is the essence of your life. And so take all of these factors and advocate for yourself, but first become educated. Educated leads to empowerment, leads to self-advocacy, leads to better outcomes.
And that's why we're all listening today. So that's good that you're here listening to this conversation. Okay, I want you to explain a little bit about, you keep mentioning how it's reversible. I want to get into some of the levers that you like to pull, what, in regards to these, the endothelium that you've talked about, the small blood vessels, what can women be doing aside from, are there treatments that you like, standard treatments? Are there supplements that you like to consider? Are there dietary? We've talked about exercise, but, are there specific things that are universally beneficial? Would like to hear.
So one thing I really want to everyone to understand is that as we go through this transition period, estrogen isn't the end all be all. It's not the answer for all of this. And it's part of it. And it's
Mm.
so important to know that you, as a big picture, estrogen is addressing one piece of it, but we've got to look at those other pieces. When people have high cholesterol and a family history, you can diet and exercise as much as you want, but if you don't address it with medication, it's going to catch up to you.
Mm.
And something like LP little a, which has now been called a novel risk factor, um, we studied it 30 years ago, but it takes that long for research to
Mm.
get clinical practice.
Mm.
LP little a is a genetic marker that makes cholesterol sticky, forming plaque very quickly earlier in life. It is significant. And so if you have high cholesterol, if you have LP little a, looking at a marker called apolipoprotein B, which is not just LDL. LDL is one tiny piece of it. It's all the parts of the cholesterol that leads to plaque formation. Knowing this is important. Knowing your endocrine system. What's up with your sugars? Do you have an insulin resistance, PMOS? That increases inflammation. It in a syndrome can be part of high blood pressure, low HDL, which is protective, high triglycerides. Triglycerides are associated with carbohydrates. Knowing all of this. So to understand what your risks are and then treating them medically if you need to is very, very important. And estrogen is part of that. It's not
Mhm.
the answer to all of it. That's the first thing. The next thing I want to talk about is just the diagnosis and understanding the risk. So go through all the risk factors that we talked about that aren't just the standard ones, the pregnancy issue, all of the, some people have autoimmune issues, inflammatory issues, that also increases the risk. Talk about depression, talk about anxiety, PTSD increases your risk of cardiovascular disease 11-fold. That's not something that happened to you in the past and you can let it go. It is something affecting your heart. And understanding all these risk factors is the first thing. The second thing is getting the right tests. Like I mentioned, ApoB, we talked about inflammatory markers, HSCRP, LP little a. We
A1C possibly.
A1C, thyroid even. I mean, there's so many different factors that go into that. And there are diagnostic tools. Now, calcium score, I'm sure you've all heard of it. It is not my favorite test. Calcium is mature plaque. We talked about the endothelium. We talked about that lining of the arteries. And soft plaque is the beginning stage of plaque formation, of atherosclerosis. As it matures, it becomes
Mhm.
calcified.
Right.
In women, calcification develops about 10 years after men. So if you're 55 postmenopausal, high cholesterol, and your calcium score is 0, you will not be treated. That's how it goes.
Right.
And if you actually get the right test, you might find out you have microvascular disease and non-calcified plaque, and you should be treated. And
Mm.
there are studies, a CAT scan angiogram clearly is an AI form of CAT scan that actually looks for that non-calcified plaque. And in women, that non-calcified plaque has a greater risk than it does in men in equal amounts. So it's important to know what those risks are and then know the deep dive that you should have to figure out how much of a risk you're at. I will tell you that what I use is a cardiopulmonary exercise test. We
Mm.
actually look at VO2 max, but we look at other metrics to see how well the arteries dilate. And we can tell if your body is compensating by, instead of delivering oxygen to the muscles, because it can't do it anymore because the arteries don't dilate that well, we can tell if you start using those internal sugar stores, which
Mm.
is anaerobic exercise. And this implies that you're really living with microvasculature that's stiff. And getting these tests will really help. And then the last piece of it, medication's not your enemy. Medications can actually prevent disease. But when I look at supplements, I look at supplementing vitamins that you might be deficient in, like omega 3s. We could check that in the bloodstream. So get it checked. Vitamin D, you can get that checked in the bloodstream. Magnesium sometimes is very helpful, especially for palpitations during menopause. So I will recommend that. If you're on a statin like Crestor, rosuvastatin, atorvastatin, don't say no to it if you need it. But
Mm,
and also go on coenzyme Q10, which
mm,
supports your mitochondria and helps prevent side effects.
mm,
It's also important to look at the lining of the artery and dilatation. And we support that through two ways. L-arginine,
mm-hmm.
citrulline are precursors to nitric oxide, help dilate those arteries. There is a company that I work with, actually, Vinia. I'm obsessed with this company because they have a formulation. It's called resveratrol. It's a specific kind of resveratrol, Piceid resveratrol.
Mm.
It's concentrated. So it's absorbed well, and the concentration of it is so high. Resveratrol is from the outside of grapes. You get
Yes,
it.
and it's unfortunately, even though it's been so studied in many different factors, in fact, fertility, ovarian longevity, the challenge with it is that it's difficult to find a bioavailable form.
This one, it has it.
That's great.
And there's been
You'll have to send me the info.
I'm gonna send you the info. I mean, I said to them, I want to work with you. I'm obsessed with this. So remember I talked about menopause,
Mm-hmm.
enos, the nitric oxide
Mm-hmm. Yep.
producer goes down and
Right.
endothelin 1 goes up. It causes the arteries to constrict. This Vinia reverses that process. So
Wow.
if you have L-arginine and you have Vinia on board, you're going to dilate those arteries. You will not dilating them sitting on the couch. That is one thing I need everyone to understand. You don't need any of this and creatine if you're sitting on the couch. They're only beneficial if you're
Yeah,
actually exercising.
I always like to say, you can't out supplement a poor lifestyle.
Yeah,
You
you just
just
can't.
can't. You
You
might
just
as well not make the expensive urine
don't do it.
until don't do it. Like you actually have to do these. So let's go to those basic, I mean, unless there's some other juicy supplements we should think about. Um, and I'll just say on the nitric oxide production,
Uh,
just because this is a little known fact, you obviously can eat a lot of foods that are rich in the precursors for nitric oxide, but if you're using mouthwash that kills oral bacterial microbiome balance, you're not going to be able to, through the salivary process, break that down into the form that the body can actually convert to nitric oxide. So, little known fun fact, switch your mouthwash. Don't use the antibacterial kind. Use something natural like a tea tree, or don't use any at all. Brush and floss. But, from a heart health perspective, I think it's a really interesting risk factor that certain mouthwashes can interfere with our nitric oxide, so essential for our dilation.
I love that you know that. That is just the best. I mean, I think what becomes so important is that when you hear things, there's so many layers to it. Don't just
Mm,
press buy it. Like it's not going to necessarily work for you.
mm.
And then I do want to answer your exercise and diet stuff.
And the lifestyle too. Yeah, all of
Yeah,
it.
like the whole thing. Exercise is really in this moderate intensity. So years ago, I think I always say it was the Jane Fonda era when we were all doing her exercise program. And it was during that time that we thought if, and this wasn't her exercise, just to be clear, but it was during the time that we thought if we didn't exercise to the point that we felt like we were going to vomit, like we didn't do enough.
Mm,
It was that aerobics, step aerobics. It was all of that high intensity stuff. And that's not actually what you need. You need moderate intensity. And that moderate intensity is at the point when you can speak, but it's like a little hard to talk, but it's
hmm.
not, that's too much.
Right.
And when you exercise in that zone, I just want to explain it a little bit. The arteries fill when the heart's relaxed. And
Mm,
so when your heart is relaxing, it's in that moderate intensity zone. When it's going too fast, it never has time to relax. And so the arteries fill. When you fill an artery, the pressure in the artery causes it to dilate. The same if you squeeze the bottom of a balloon, the top gets bigger. So in that moderate, I just visualize that moderate
I
intensity.
just love this so much because it's, you're referencing the 70s in terms of like Jane Fonda cardio till you pass out. But, that's been replaced every like 2 decades. There's a new torturous cardio regime that we are supposed to do as women. And that, there was like the CrossFit thing, and then there was training for a triathlon, and then there was HIIT workouts. I mean, it's just, or the biking till you pass out. I mean, it's just, yeah. But I
Here's the
love this
deal.
idea of the gentle, it's in the relaxation
In the
that
relax.
the arteries get the training and get the support around dilation. It's also in the rest that our bodies can make more melatonin, can support ovarian function, because why would we even want to sleep, right? So that we could have our ovaries make more estrogen for longer, so
Right.
that you can protect your heart. I mean, anyway, I love this idea that even the heart is like optimized in those moments of rest. Not hard. The moderate path for women is so critical throughout our lifespan.
So doing that 4 to 5 days a week, strength training 2 to 3 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
If a joint hurts, you're lifting too heavy. I know
Mm-hmm.
we all want to lift heavy. Just mental note, don't push that, because when you get injured, you won't be able to do any of it.
That's right.
So I want you to lift heavy. I don't want you to lift so heavy that it hurts ever.
That's ever.
Listen to your body. Listen to your body, please, please, please. Because I see that other side of it.
I
Women get
love that. It's very doable, right? We're talking about 150 minutes over
right.
the week of that moderate cardio. So like walking, right? Sounds like
Listen to
walking.
a podcast.
Listen to my podcast and go for a walk.
Right.
That's great. You heard it from Dr. Steinbaum. And then, 2 or 3 times a week is it's been studied many different directions to be sort of like the minimum viable dose for strength training. Any sort of input that you have on that more, let's say, more stereotypical cardiovascular training, like sprinting up a hill for 30 seconds, like anything to train the heart in
Right.
that way?
So you've got to start with the basics. If you cannot run, let's say, or walk, it's actually probably going to be a walk for you for 30 consistent consecutive minutes without having to stop or feeling super tired. Don't sprint. Get to
Mm-hmm.
the point when this is fine and easy for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then that high intensity intervals is actually so powerful to increase your VO2 max and actually helpful for arterial health. But it's not until you master that other one that it becomes helpful.
And
And
how much should we do? How long should we do it?
so if we say 30 minutes, the ratio should be 2 to 1. So what I say is 5 minutes of moderate intensity, 2.5 of high intensity. Do that 4 cycles and you're at 30 minutes. And it goes like
So,
that.
and once a week potentially for that
For the high
training.
intensity, it depends how many times you're doing it. If you're doing it 5 days a week, you could do it 2 days a week, 3 days a week. And the more you do this, you're getting into better shape. So the more
Mm-hmm.
you do those high intensity intervals also.
So one could do their high intensity interval training 5 days a week if they're doing it in that 2-to-1 ratio, or no?
I would say give it 4 days. And
Okay.
if you're exercising 6 days a week, it again, I think everyone needs a rest day, at least one rest day, if not two.
I take 2. I do my sort of strength and cardio training 5 days a week. And then weekends is like restorative walking, yoga, you
That's
know,
Yep.
yeah. I
I
think.
think 2 days off is what most of us want or need,
Mm,
and getting that relaxation, stretching, yoga, or nothing. Read a book, like do something else. We
yeah.
do need to recover. And then when we get to sort of how do we nourish ourselves from the diet side, I have to go back again in time to a study on the Mediterranean diet. The initial study, it was the Lyon Heart trial that showed a 72% reduction in cardiovascular disease in that first study. Mediterranean diet is high in omega-3 fatty acids. That's fish, salmon, mackerel, tuna, caviar is on that list, sardines, cold water fish. It's also nuts, olive oil, flaxseed, and lots of vegetables, multigrains. There's protein in multigrains. I gotta just mention this high protein.
You're like, we're psychically linked. I was just going to say, so tell me about how you're feeling about protein.
I knew you were headed. So I've got to explain this, and I don't want to get too complicated, but I think this is important for people to understand.
Let's do it.
ApoE is a gene that is associated with heart disease and actually also Alzheimer's. There are 3 types, 2, 3, and 4. When you have a 3-3, you're normal. You can metabolize anything. You can actually metabolize saturated fats in moderation. But when you have a 3-4 and a 4-4 in this ApoE, your shuttle system is broken, meaning when you eat a saturated fat, you digest it, but the shuttle system that takes it out of the body so you can poop it out is kind of not working. It's broken when it's 3-4, and when it's 4-4, it's really broken. And so for those conditions, getting your protein from saturated fats is not a great idea. So when people are talking about these high protein, high fat diets,
More keto. You're talking about keto now.
yeah,
Yeah.
I get a little uncomfortable because as a cardiologist, I have a lot of patients that are ApoE 3-4 and 4-4.
Sure.
And that kind of protein is not good for them.
I love that you are bringing this up because there's also a hormonal link and challenge with ketogenic diets. It can be very dysregulating from an endocrine system perspective for women to cut out carbohydrates, right? Because there are insulin receptor sites on the ovary. There's also leptin receptor sites on the ovary. So, you have to be very careful about how you're managing your blood sugar and what your fat intake is like, because it is going to directly impact the production of sex hormones. And that is going to impact not just your experience of your cycle and your fertility and your perimenopause, but also your cardiovascular health. And it's all connected. And I love that you're bringing up this test because you can test and not guess. Can you tolerate keto? I mean, I don't love it for women, but if you still want to try it, go get an ApoE test to see if you're a 3-3 or a 3-4 or a 4-4, and then you can just know for certain what's safe for you or not. But I think the other thing about the Mediterranean diet that's really nice is that it's very plant forward in protein. But if you are having animal protein, it's more lean proteins, which, if you don't go and get that test, it's just a safe default.
Yes. And it's healthy for everyone.
That's right.
I do want to tell you, way back in the day when I was running the cardiac rehab program, it was when Atkins was around, and we had patients that chose to go on Atkins.
Yeah.
And we were running Ornish's, which is a very low saturated fat diet.
Yes.
And I will tell you, and this is my own clinical experience, the women that were on Atkins ended up in the cath lab eventually. They just did worse. So I get uncomfortable hearing so many doctors talking about this high protein diet and eating meat. I just need you to pause a second, because I've had too much clinical experience around women just getting their protein from saturated fat sources. You can get it from other sources. That's not to say I'm telling you need to be vegan. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that for me, Mediterranean diet's the best. It's fish, lean meat. This is what I talk about with my patients. And it's mostly because of that genetic piece. But to your point, it is probably the healthiest for everyone. And that's what we've seen in trials over and over again.
I love that. I mean, my story because we were chatting about it. I started lifting more intentionally about a year and a half ago and had to increase my protein intake. But the only protein I take in is extremely lean protein, liquid egg whites, ground lean turkey, chicken breast. If I do any red meat, maybe occasionally it's like ground bison or venison that is extremely lean. And now with all of these wonderful vegan plant protein powders that are highly bioavailable and super helpful. If you're not interested in cooking, there's just so many options to be consuming adequate protein, because protein right now is so trendy, but doing it in a way that's heart conscious,
Yes.
I think that's really important.
So that's the other supplement that we didn't get to talk about that I think
Let's
is
talk about it.
It's just getting protein from these plant sources that you can put in a smoothie in the morning, and you don't have to get it in a way that might not be the healthiest for you.
Let's just touch for a minute, because I mean, honestly, this is like a master class, but let's just talk about metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, blood sugar dysregulation, visceral fat. Where does that picture start to become a cardiovascular conversation for women, and how much of it is reversible? I think we know the answer by now, but I just want to make sure that we can touch upon it officially.
I have to tell you something that I really forgot about till you started talking about my career. I wrote an article about the metabolic syndrome, like before anyone was talking about it. It was called Syndrome X.
Hmm.
And there was this one study. It's like now all of a sudden we're saying PCOS is PMOS. It was like the day after Syndrome X started being called metabolic syndrome. And I was like, this is what it is. And you just described it. It's really belly fat, it's elevated sugars, not diabetes, but that's associated with insulin resistance.
Mm-hmm.
It's belly fat, abdominal adiposity, it's low HDL, and high triglycerides. And that pattern actually leads to very small, dense LDL. So when we go back to this concept of LDL, it's not giving us the biggest picture because it's not telling us what kind of LDL. In the metabolic syndrome, your ApoB is going to be higher than your LDL is. And that's why ApoB is so sensitive. So how the metabolic syndrome works is insulin resistance is the problem. So you eat sugar, your insulin goes up, there's resistance, doesn't work. Insulin goes up, still doesn't work. Insulin goes up, and then sugar drops, right? And so insulin is an inflammatory. It is such a huge inflammatory. It actually can lead to weight gain in itself. Think about that. And as it does that, belly fat is part of the problem. So we also have an increase in blood pressure and we have an increase in triglycerides. This is the perfect storm for coronary artery disease, for atherosclerosis. Now, where do we start? I got to tell you, it's so basic. Cut out the sugars, cut out the simple sugars, cut out the carbohydrates, the pastas, all the white stuff that you have in your life, and just shift them over to the ancient grains. Start there. Start walking 30 minutes, 5 days a week. You've now taken away the entire setup for the insulin resistance. So now your sugars aren't going up and down, the insulin isn't going up and down, and you start losing weight. And now you're walking. And you are also increasing your metabolism as you're exercising. And now your blood pressure comes down. And when that happens, also your triglycerides come down, and your HDL, that protective part of cholesterol, is associated with exercise and estrogen. So as your estrogen goes down, your HDL goes down, you keep walking, that HDL is going to stay up and be extraordinarily protective. And so when you look at the metabolic syndrome, and this is what my article was about, it is a reason for you to say, I can change this and I can change the outcomes of my life.
You lead with such an anti-fear, approach, and where did that philosophy come from for you?
I'm going to tell you the truth, and I'll try to tell you quickly. My father is a retired oncologist. Very interestingly, he did some of the first research on tamoxifen for breast cancer, and he was focused on breast cancer. So over the years, I learned so much from him about women's health, and he learned from me as well. And that has been such an interesting dynamic. But I loved going in the hospital with him, and I grew up going to work with him. And he had a lot of patients that he lost, though. He really, he always says that he feels like he was giving back so much to people to live their lives with as much dignity for as long as they could. And I just cried.
Mm.
He had an optimistic approach to it. And I said, this is not something I could do, but I understood that idea of how do you make people live the longest, healthiest life. And it was that day in the emergency room when I really saw that women were dying and they were getting sick. And I started doing the research and I said, my goodness, we can actually have women living longer and healthier. Right now, they spend 25% more of their lives in 6 states compared to men. We can change that. That was it. That was it for me. I didn't want to be a cardiologist. I wanted to be the person that was preventing every single human being from ever needing a stent. That was my goal.
That's such an important story to hear, that, it's about changing your input so you can have a different quality of life for as long as you get to have that life. That's all we can ask for. If you could get every woman who's listening today to do one thing differently starting this week, not a list, just one, what would it be?
Get up, get moving, figure it out. Do something you love. And the one thing that I learned for myself, I love to exercise. I would just exercise all day long. But, I have a job and a child and things. But I promised myself that I would do this like you 5 days a week at least. And so I get on the Peloton right now. I do listen to podcasts when I'm on the Peloton. I make it something that is enjoyable for me, not just for the exercise. I look forward to it because I get to listen to that podcast. And I don't listen to podcasts at any other time because I don't have time. And it is this moment where I'm like, this is exciting and educational and fun, and I feel great. So the one thing you can do is figure out what's going to make you stick to it. If it's a podcast, if it's a television show, if it's calling your best friend, figure out what's going to make you stick with it. Because it's going to take you about 6 weeks to like it if you haven't been doing it. And if you quit before you get to the place where you're obsessed, then you're not going to get the benefits.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing that I would say. And I just want to throw out one more thing.
Oh, go ahead. I still have my rapid fire questions, but go ahead.
How you think and how you feel about yourself, life, the world is probably the most powerful thing that you have. Because if you wake up every single day with optimism, glass half full, that actually changes your outcomes. You live a longer, healthier life. And I think that if we approach our health, if we approach all of this from a place of I can't, I fear, I'm exhausted, it's overwhelming, we are losing our power and we are giving our power away. If we look at it and say, look what I can do, look how I can do it. This is what's happening and there are ways I can intervene. I am going to live the best life I can. You just change the outcome of your life just like that.
I mean, not for nothing, but your thoughts create neurotransmitters that end up programming your cells. There are receptor sites on them. It's not woo-woo, it's actually measurable. So I think that's really an important and beautiful thing. I have a few rapid fire questions before we wrap up. True or false? A woman's heart attack looks different from a man's.
Oh, yeah. Man, elephant sitting on the chest, you know what's happening. A woman could be a little short of breath, flu-like symptoms, sleep disturbances. She's just like not feeling great. Don't worry, everyone. We all have days like that. It's like a consistent feeling. They could look so different.
Hot take. Stress as a cardiovascular risk factor. Rate from 1 to 10 how seriously cardiology is actually taking stress as a cardiovascular risk factor.
I did not expect you to have that little twist at the end. So cardiology as a community, let's say, is much more about treatment. It's much more about fixing once the disease happens. Stress is a lot about prevention. We're not quite there yet. Which is why I keep talking about it.
Good.
Because
I think it's so important that you just even acknowledge it is very helpful for our listeners.
It's just not part of the conversation. And that's when it's about us and being empowered, educated, and self-advocating for ourselves.
That's exactly why we're here. This or that, a woman in perimenopause, which is more important to get right, diet or sleep?
Ooh, so interesting. Um, that's tough. I'm going to tell you diet. And the reason I'm going to tell you that is because so many things are happening on the endocrine level that if you're messing with your endocrine system through your diet, game over.
It's going
Game
to
over.
disrupt your sleep, that's for
It's,
sure,
yeah,
right? I know
yeah,
that's a tricky one, and honestly, it's just fun to hear how people answer it because it's such a chicken and an egg, kind of conversation. They're
yeah,
so indivisibly important, but I like your take because if you start the day and go through the day with healthy eating habits, you are more able
you're
to
going to
sleep
sleep
better.
well. You're going to sleep.
Exactly.
And you have to focus on that to
But
get
you could also argue that if you don't get a good night's sleep, it's harder to control cravings and keep blood sugar regulated. So it is a really challenging thing. It can be a virtuous circle or a vicious cycle. And so,
there.
that's a
It's
tricky,
well said.
that's like an impossible question, but I thought I would ask it anyway. Um, Finish the sentence. The most overlooked moment to start protecting a woman's heart health is
Pregnancy.
Hmm.
Early,
True
early.
or false? A woman can have significant cardiovascular disease in progress and still pass a standard cardiac workup.
Most women. That's the story.
Yeah.
So a standard cardiac workup picks up disease, blockages in the arteries when it's 70% or greater. A stress echo, a standard stress test, only picks up disease 70% or greater.
Mm.
If you are a 55-year-old woman who has just gone through menopause, no family history, blood pressure's gone up a little belly fat, maybe some metabolic syndrome, chances are you're not going to have a 70% blockage. You might have non-calcified plaque. That's 20, 30, 40%. The standard of care right now will miss your disease. That's why we're here. That's why we're
Because you don't want to wait till you're at the 70% mark,
no,
right? That's what we've
we don't
learned
have
today.
to. We do not
And we don't have to, and we should not, right? We want to catch it and we want to take action early. Dr. Suzanne, thank you so much for this incredibly valuable, life-changing, essential conversation and education on women and the heart. How can women find out more about you, follow you? Where are there resources that they can dive deeper? How can we learn more from you after the show?
On my website, drsuzannesteinbaum.com, and you can find me on all social media platforms, Dr. Steinbaum. There's a lot I'm working on that I'm trying to create tools that really through the technology space, and I love talking with you about that, because it's a tough world in that technology space.
Yes, we met at a FemTech conference and I was like, oh, we just have to be friends now.
Okay. Yeah, like
Yes,
forever and
yes,
ever.
yes, yes.
Because I thought I went through a cardiology fellowship. I thought I could handle anything. And the entrepreneurial space in femtech is a very, very tough place to be. 2% of all VC dollars go to women CEOs. It's a tough world out there.
And yet, I have to say, it
Yes.
is the most extraordinary time in
Oh,
human
for sure.
history recently for women because it's not like we're having some sort of renaissance. There's nothing that's nothing's coming back that was there before. Women are innovating like yourself in the femtech space. It's very exciting. The future is very bright.
It
Talking
is.
about like that glass half full. I mean, I've been in the space for 25 years, so long that when I first started talking about building a hormonal healthcare platform at Flow Living, people looked at me like I had multiple heads. Like, what are you talking about? What is functional, hormonal care? What are you? But we're in such a different place, and it's so exciting. The future of women's health is looking so good, and it's because of physicians like yourself who are really connecting the dots, also thinking about building technology and putting the power in more directly into the hands of the women who need it. That's what's
Yes.
going to change the future of, I would say, our experience as women with our health. So I'm going to put all of the resources that Dr. Suzanne has in the show notes so that you can find them. And, of course, if you know somebody in your life who is dealing with heart disease or has a family history of heart disease or is postmenopausal and, trying to figure out her care, please forward her this episode. Share it with your friends, with your family. This is life-saving information. And if you're a younger woman and you're thinking about so far away from, just keep your focus on all of the dietary and lifestyle levers that Dr. Steinbaum talked about. Put those in your routine today so that you can be well prepared and well nurtured from a heart perspective for your future. And, please, if you haven't yet subscribed to the Ovary Club, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave a comment. This is how other women find the show and how we together as a community, just like our ovaries are connected to everything in our bodies, we are connected as women through information, through education, and through helping each other. So that's how we all can help ourselves and the people we care about know better and do better when it comes to women's hormonal health. Thank you, Dr. Steinbaum, for being with us today. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And we will see you next time.
Thank you.